Well, hello there. Hello,
Hello.
everybody. Hello, our listeners, and hello to Steve Gibson, president of Gearbox Publishing. And how do you do?
I'm great. How about you, sir?
Yeah, thank you. I'm feeling fine too. So, we're going to talk about lots of things today. We're going to talk about publishing, game development, games journalism, and, well, games industry in general.
Sure.
First of all, could you explain for our listeners what your sphere of work now at Gearbox Publishing is?
Um, yeah. So we broadly, what we do is we try to take games that are being made, sometimes funded by us, most of the time funded by us, and make sure as many people see it in as many places as possible. So take any game that you like and you're wondering how it gets to work on a Nintendo Switch. We would be, as the publisher, the folks who help to work with Nintendo to make sure that it functions properly on that platform, work with Nintendo to make sure that as many people see it as possible, and advertise it around the world to make sure that that works. So that's generally speaking, that's the role of a game publisher, is to get games into places.
Publishers used to be like companies that printed discs and pretty much did the logistics so that
Yes.
these discs are on the shelves in stores. How did this role in the games industry transformed during these years?
So yeah, originally years ago, the role of a publisher was indeed also to do the actual logistics of printing discs and getting it onto shelves and having deals with your Targets and Best Buys and games of the world. We still do that too. We still do that. We're shipping millions of discs around the world right now. But what that did also was, years ago, the only way to buy games was retail, right? So if you as a game maker had a game you wanted people to get, digital distribution did not really exist to a significant degree back then outside like BBSs and stuff. So you had to, as a matter of just getting your game into hands, do a deal with a publisher because they were the only person who could get you on a shelf at Walmart. So that was a very different dynamic. These days now, game makers have way more freedom. Their digital distribution, which means that lots of people can reach customers, at least a big portion of them, just through lighting up a button on Steam or Epic Game Store. So that world's changed quite a bit, which has created a lot more competition, which has also been great for game makers and game customers, right? There's way more people doing all these things than ever, which has raised the bar of competition.
Yeah, I'm also asking that because Gearbox transformed from being purely a development studio to a publisher recently, right? Maybe 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like most publishers right now, I mean, big publishers, they started when there were still discs and, well, brick and mortar shops, right? And you are like in the wave of, let's say, new publishers that are digital first, right? And that started really recently. Can you very briefly describe the thought process behind that led to this decision that you have to start now publish games, not only develop them?
That started with, we at Gearbox, we purchased the rights to Homeworld, the original Homeworld franchise. And many of us were very passionate about that. And we wanted to get that game into front of a bunch of more people. We wanted to remaster it and make it look even better. And so we were looking at, okay, we have this great game that we know people will love. How do we get it to people? And so we talked to a couple of publishers because we were not a publisher. They said, well, we would do this, but only we want to sign you up for more Borderlands. Right. And this is the competition we had everywhere around. And it became apparent to us that if we want to get a game as great as Homeworld in front of as many people as possible, without signing away our own future for our other games, we just had to do it ourselves. So we went through that process, we figured it out, and then we did it. And then Homeworld Remastered launched a year and a half later. And we were very successful. And it kind of helps to have a great game, right? But we figured out a lot of those pieces. And once we figured out, hey, this is possible for us, we have a lot of the right people, we started building from that momentum right there with Homeworld.
Do you think it's kind of a natural process that a game company grows? It acquires like more fans, its fan base grows, right? And it can convert this fan base to become a publisher, right? Or it's more like a risky thing that not every company that grows takes.
Yeah. It is very risky for sure. The largest risk, when you look at a lot of developers who would wish to create a publisher, they're going to almost universally decide, well, because we want to publish our own games, right? That's the thing. They want to get as close as possible to the customer and have a direct interaction, and that's a great decision for a lot of developers. I guess common mistake that we saw, that fortunately we hired enough to teach us to not do this mistake, was to only focus on publishing your own game. You need to hire a lot of people, spend a lot of money, build a lot of infrastructure, and then your game studio is only going to make one or not a lot of games. Traditionally, a game company does not put out a game every quarter, right? So you build this big machine with all this infrastructure to be able to publish things, and you know what? Those people, they have a salary that you need to pay every month, and they're sitting there not actually making money on publishing games for the vast majority of that time. So that's what we did differently, was we said, okay, I want to build this machine to be able to reach customers, but I also need to understand the economics really dictate that I should have other games coming through this, the same expertise, same skill set, same thing. Now it's mutually beneficial. Like, okay, I'm building a great publisher for Gearbox games, and at the same time, I also now have time to apply these same expertise to other people's games. I mean, it's smart for us as a business to do more games, and it's smart for Gearbox as a whole to benefit from that, ongoing experience and expertise being built. So that's what we did. We hybrid, right? We did both, other people's games and our own games. And so far, the vast majority has been other people's games, and probably will be for the near future, until Gearbox Software grows to a point where it starts putting out a game on its own every quarter, right?
You mean to say that these are just two separate branches in the games industry, right? Because there are totally different crafts inside this industry, right?
Yes, a very, very big portion of that is yes. Even the artists, of which both groups have artists. When you get to the upper tier of that craft, it is indeed very different. You do not have artists who can jump back and forth. A guy who can set up and build a great trailer for a video game, who needs to be able to get into the engine and do things, very often is a different skill set from a person who's actually doing similar kind of things in an actual shipping game. There's a fair degree of crossover, but the further expert you get, the more actually divergent they are. And then on the rest of it, accounting and finance is wildly more complicated. And just dealing with all the international taxes and all these things that you would have to do as a publisher. As a developer, you say, okay, Microsoft, thanks for taking the money in and worrying about all these global taxes. I will take my check, right? That is the role of a developer in that world. Whereas a publisher says, okay, how much money did I take in Italy versus Germany, right? And do all these pieces. So it is indeed a very different and specialized skill set. The larger scale you get. We are fortunate that we are built, I guess, let's say, on the shoulders of a developer. So Gearbox Publishing has several people that we pulled from a developer who really understand, more so than a traditional publisher would, what it is to be in the seat of a developer, to understand what matters to creators when they see their game sold to people. So that's also, that's a little distinct for Gearbox Publishing. There are certainly many publishers who have some degree of that, but I would say our overall like staff makeup is more game makers than most.
Yeah, I remember actually Randy said that it would be the most developer-friendly publisher, right?
Yes.
So how do you think it is going, being the most developer-friendly publisher?
I feel very confident that a process that we've implemented is when we work with developers, I would believe that any developer that we have published, if you ask them how it went, they would give a hearty recommendation. What we do that is developer friendly, that exceeds most publishers, is just a level of transparency and education we offer. We look to a lot of the developers and say, hey, look, the craft is the creation. A great publisher, really our skill set, if you boil it down, is I can tell you will gamers like this game, and I know the most efficient way to put this in front of people, right? That's what a publisher, that's their true value, is tell a creator this is viable and then make sure as many people see it as possible. That is an expertise of its own, but it's not generally not a creative expertise, right? Like you can train a lot of people to do the thing that we do, and data is very informative. Whereas a creator, you are making things up out of your own mind. You are imagining something that's not been seen before. There's not a data analyst who can, at least now, say, you know what, I'm going to make this pink dragon that does this, this, and this. That's not a role a publisher does. So that's what we do, is we have the respect for the creators to understand that the true genius of game making is the heart of what we do, and that we respect that. And that we treat them as such because they are the value. We are just a expert logistics and evaluation team to help get people to see their creations. And so we have a lot of people within all of Gearbox who play a lot more games and speak a lot more game fluent than just about any other publisher that you'll run into, right? So that's the thing, is our respect and deference to creators and our transparency to the creators. That's what we do that is different.
I feel like there's been, an opposition in the games industry, at least from gamers' perspective, between publishers and developers. Like developers being these creative guys that make games, and they do it for the love and for the art, right? And publishers being these guys that make money, and they are inherently evil.
Sure.
Right. So can you just try to debunk these myths?
Oh, geez. I mean, so there is always a scale of, as a game maker, where are you on the spectrum of artists, like the traditional for yourself, make your own creation artists, and commercial artists, where everything you make is wondering, I want to make this thing that I think most people will like, who will actually give me money for it. So that starts with the game maker. And so that's what you first have to understand, is who is the game maker, and who do they think they're making this game for? Is it just to entertain themselves, or are they thinking about the potential customer? And right there, when they make that decision, that is in fact already making decisions for money. As a game maker, say, you know what? I don't play co-op games, but I know a lot of people do. This is a game maker saying this sentence, right? And then they will make it co-op. Well, why did you do that? It wasn't for you. You're making decisions for commercial success. So that starts with the game maker, who is already making some choices for that. So now you take the next layer up, say, okay, now you hand this to a publisher. Publisher's not making anything anymore, right? So now they're only the second part of the decision is like, oh, okay, so you made a co-op game, right? Okay, now I, as a publisher, my decision making is like, okay, given that it is a co-op game, where would I spend my time and money to sell this, right? Where do I think that most people will convert on this, right? Or the most people who would see this would be excited to do that, right? So that is, in fact, yes, a commercial decision. So a publisher, their entire job revolves around whatever the game creator decided. How do I make it make more money? So yes, that's true. I can't debunk it, because indeed it is a commercial job. It is, in fact, the entire job revolves around making sure whatever was spent to make that game, it makes more when you sell it.
Yeah, but you can debunk the evil part.
Oh, yes. Those parts, yeah. When you see things where a publisher announces, hey, record profit-breaking quarter, and then you see they lay off 15% of their staff, right? Like, you see things like that happen.
Yeah, I feel like
yes.
I understand the company you are referencing to.
I just random, example, right? But like,
yeah, it randomly happens to be the news about Activision Blizzard, I think, like probably a year ago.
So when you see stuff like that, that definitely perpetuates that, and that there's a million reasons that can't happen. But what we do is we try to imagine the long-term impact of a decision like that. Like, on the short term, okay, to remain profitable, you have a bunch of people who their job is not necessary because you're not shipping anything for a couple of quarters, which kind of relates back to what I said before. So in the short term, for a company to make a decision about like their next fiscal quarter or a few quarters, they're like, okay, well, these people have nothing to do, right? So that would be the right financial decision if you were thinking about the company's bottom line and the shareholders' bottom line. We think about it, I guess, more broadly of like, okay, yes, this will cost me more money as a company right now, but this will cost me way more in our view. Now, we could be wrong to say we lay these folks off, and then we would wish to ask them that, hey, now I need to publish things again a few quarters later. I want to make you a job offer for that same salary. And then another publisher says, I also want to make you a job offer for that same salary. The person who got laid off, they're almost certainly, in our view, going to choose the company that did not do that. And what's going to happen for us if we made that decision to convince them to join, I now have to pay them more, right? Because the job security is not as high, so they're going to demand more of a salary. So our view is that if you do that a few times, it actually costs you money to do those, quote, evil things, which is, hiring and firing seasonally. Our view is that will cost you in the long run as a business, and it will cost you in the short term as like you feel evil for doing it, right? So that's how we operate, which is why we also always have that kind of pipeline and scale to account for those things. But I mean, to be fair, for other folks who do that, like you have to understand that to them, sometimes by firing some people, they may be saving the jobs of far more. We don't actually know exactly what goes into all that. I would like to imagine that someone doesn't make that decision just for a few bucks to fire somebody and cost them their job for just that. I hope that it's more to it than that. But certainly our view is to try to never do that. And our view is you actually lose money in the long run anyway. So it's arguable that you should not be doing that in any situation, as far as we can see. But we're a small publisher. Like, there's maybe 100 people doing publishing within Gearbox. But there are some people who make some tough choices, but it starts at the creator. Creator's also going to spend some time and energy making choices because they think a game will sell more copies. Yeah.
Okay, so I would like to ask some newbie questions.
Sure.
Why don't you started the publishing in-house because you wanted to publish your own game, right? Why don't you publish your every game since then? Like, why don't you publish Borderlands 3, for example?
Oh, well, that one's easy. 2K is honestly a fantastic publisher. They also, as I mentioned before, they take on the financial risk of the creation of Borderlands. And there are a ton of people over at 2K who we have no doubt want to make sure that the game reaches as many people as possible, as successful as possible. The reason like we made a publisher was to right? To meet as many folks as we can, and also not create other obligations that we didn't like. 2K is asking nothing of us except for to keep making Borderlands and that they keep publishing it. And we think they do a good job. So that part's really simple. If we thought that they were doing an awful job, yeah, we would have new feelings about that. But they've been doing this for 10 years with us. And we have very few complaints. And what has happened over that time as we've created a publisher, as we have gotten to now understand sometimes when we thought 2K was making an unreasonable request to us, now as a publisher, we're like, oh, that's why they're doing that. And it's actually not, we feel more than ever the 2K has been a great publisher. And now we understand even more what they do. We're even more certain of that. I would expect we're going to keep working with them. Even though we publish other things that we make, we will certainly talk to 2K about also those things as well, because we believe in a lot in their ability to do that. You know, I like them a lot. They're good people.
Let me just specify that you mean there is also a problem of scale, right? So you said that you are a small publisher, and Borderlands 3 is obviously a big game, right? So you need a big publisher for that, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're huge. Yeah, that's a big factor too. Yeah, it's like we think they're great at it, and they're at a scale also that we are not. So there's plenty of reasons to keep going with them.
Do you think there are still other cases that it's better to use an external publishing company and not an in-house one, especially if you already have an in-house publisher?
Yeah, for sure. Like you need the publisher to agree with and believe in what you're trying to make and sell. Yeah, I'd say like games like Homeworld is the perfect example. It's like there's not a lot of games like that. So say we were making a brand new game that was a lot like Homeworld that had no track record. Now we, as a company also made of game makers, we may believe in that. And we say, okay, I want to make this and publish this. If I didn't have that ability to also publish, I would be going around talking to all the other publishers like, hey, I want to make this game. Can you help me make sure that as many people see this as possible? So a publisher also being within Gearbox creates more creative freedom for our game makers to not feel the burden so much of like needing to convince an external party of why this is a great idea, why we want to bring this game to market. So that creates, more, I guess, creative risk taking in our building. What it also does, though, is it benefits Borderlands. Same thing, just folks feeling more free to do more creative exploration almost always also bleeds into our biggest franchise, which is Borderlands, right? So you will see things in the years to come in Borderlands were the fruits of another project that are probably being published by Gearbox, like that. Those ideas are going to influence each other. So that, yeah, it's a great benefit to the whole thing. We're glad we're doing it.
What kind of games do you as a company prefer working with? Right? Do you have special genre preferences, or maybe like business structure preferences, or anything?
Well, we start with what we know, which was like loot-based ARPG and oftentimes the ability for co-op. You can see that with the games that we chose, and shooter, right? So you look at what we've done. It is like Bulletstorm was one of the first things we did, right? Which was just a straight up shooter, and you could see a lot of similarities to Duke Nukem, which we've also published and owned, right? Then you look at Risk of Rain, co-op, loot-based, shooter, but third person. And then you look at now, most recently, Godfall, co-op, loot-based, third person, but melee instead of shooter. So you can see a lot of that really is kind of we're working with what we know best. But we are trying to, I guess, get broader with our ability. And that's, Homeworld, of course, is the big one for that. It's like, okay, we got nothing else like that. There's very few games like that. We would wish to be a publisher who also can expertly assess and help market other games. But so far, it's really just revolved around our ability to do the things we know best, and we're slowly trying to get our broader, I guess, understanding and confidence of what other games we can put out, and that we feel like what people will want to buy and play.
Let's say I develop a cute game about babies with chainsaws, which is from the gameplay perspective a puzzle. What do I need to do so that you publish my game?
Well, that's an easy buy, no problem. So if it's a brand new game with a brand new idea, what we do is we have a game evaluation group, which is comprised of several different kinds of people who are on production-minded, art-minded, design-minded, and also different walks of life, right? Like it's male and female, as well as different race. As we, as a publisher, are trying to make sure that we do not just continue to publish the thing that happens to appeal to one particular, like 35-year-old white male, right? Like, so we're trying to do a lot of that there. So it's really just tell us the business of it, right? How did you decide to make this game? What is your vision for what it will be? And then we do our own analysis, which is both subjective, which is a bunch of our game makers, game evaluators, they play it if there's a build, they look at it and they walk through the game design. And then we do the objective measure, which is our sales analysts. They will say, okay, a game that is of at least this quality in this genre, sold at this time, at this price point, like those kinds of things. Here's what roughly a game like would do on average. And we combine those two together. It's like, okay, do we think this broadly will do well enough to rationalize our time? And then do we believe the guys who are making this, they're doing a good enough job, right? So that's how we evaluate as that, and that's a mixture of subjective and objective analysis. And then a big factor actually is, do we like working with that person, right? Because you're getting work married for at least a couple of years. So do we believe that the game maker is reliable, a good communicator, and will also work well with adversity and criticism well, right? Like that's a huge factor. Is, say you have your great Chainsaw Baby game, and we say, oh man, turns out in, I don't know, Australia, you're saying that you have to take drugs to use the chainsaw really well. Australia has these rules about implications of taking drugs. So your choices are not launch in Australia or change your game to actually be able to launch in Australia. Like, how would they work with and react to that? And then we as a publisher, we would say, okay, I'm going to go argue with the Australian government about why this isn't really true. But those are the kinds of things that you need to do and understand the game maker will have to deal with if they want to have their game as many places as possible. Is understand there are regional, cultural differences. Even actually, Risk of Rain also has a needle where you take to adrenaline shot, right? There are some places that have a strong reaction to the visuals of a needle. What do you do there? So that's the kind of stuff we think about, is how well will it do, how well will the game maker actually deal with the world markets and not just the one they happen to live in.
Okay, so from the perspective of a publisher, what was the best, the most, from the communicative point and so on and so forth, the game maker that you have been working with?
I didn't understand the question, sorry.
I mean, you said that it is very important to choose the game maker, like so that he or she communicates, so that they understand what they need to change, and so that they do these changes, right? So in your years at publishing, what was the best game maker that you had a chance to work with?
There's man, they all have different strengths, right? Because I mentioned like all these characteristics of like, some are excellent at communicating like big broad picture of what they're after, what they're trying to do, and how they will reach that, and all the different pieces. Some are great at the production communication and delivery, where the thing they say that it's going to show up when they say it's going to show up does actually do that. Some are really good at the community side of it, or like the customer facing communication. So when I think about that, I think about like the counterplay guys. They are very good at the thinking about the customer experience. And we're doing like tons of patching right now for Godfall, and they understood it was coming, and they prioritized it, and they thought about the customer seat, right? The guys over at Norsfell, who are making Tribes of Midgard, which comes out next year, those guys, they are the best that we've honestly ever seen about the documentation and delivery of their production milestones. And they are excellent at working with our research group about, we have, customers play test and get feedback on like, hey, I do not understand this component of the game. And then they will actually look at that, analysis, and they say, okay, well, I need to create this tutorial to teach people how to do this, right? So they work really, really well with our user research group. And then you look at teams like Hopu, who do Risk of Rain. That, when we started working with them, was 3 people. That whole thing took them years to make, right? And so they are, as you'd expect, wildly disciplined about just triaging and prioritizing. We say, hey, here's 25 bugs. On that moment, they're saying, I'll get this figured out, but done by this time, right? Because that's how they've operated for so long. So like their ability to triage is second to none because of the team scale that they've forced that discipline on themselves for. So I mean, like, and then, they're just straight up personality wise, like easy to work with, understand. One of my favorites has been the Compulsion team with their CEO. That's been delightful. And then the CEO over at People Can Fly also, he's been a lot of fun. He with Bulletstorm, we had not published anything when he decided to work with us. He took a very, outside of Homeworld, we've done nothing. And so he took a big gamble betting on us. And so we try to, as often as possible, show him appreciation for it. He was a huge part of other folks understanding it was possible to bet on Gearbox to publish their games. And he's not regretted that. He's done he's seen a lot of success from that and through that. So yeah, it's really just everyone has their own different strengths. But it's really about just us believing you have at least some of those strengths and you're good about communicating those things. Because there's a lot of people whose jobs depend on a game showing up, right? So if you delay a game a day before, well, you're not surprised. We know this. Game makers know if they're not going to hit a deadline well before a day before, right? So that's the kind of thing, is communication and understanding is like, is the big one for us, because it actually does translate to happiness and profit.
You also mentioned that sometimes you have to change something in game, let's say for Australia or for other regions, right? So can you recall some of the most strange things that you had to change in games and you had to cut from production?
Well, we've not yet had a situation where we had to cut a thing. We have had to make special versions. But that's, it usually revolves around, for China, there is a lot of sensitivity around skeletal figures, as well as, government, kind of like, criticism of government, right? So what we had there was on actually for Risk of Rain, for example, there is one enemy which has the look of a skull. So in China, we're going to make that probably not like a skull, right? Like what it will be, I don't know. We're going to leave that to the game makers, but we say, hey, Hopu, here's your options. Either you don't officially launch in China, or you figure out a new creative way to make this bad guy scary, but not skeleton. So we've been fortunate enough to not have major ones like that. But what I can also tell you is, also for China, for We Happy Few, the whole game, the entire game theme revolves around the idea as the government is tricking you, or the local government is tricking you into believing the world is one way when it's really another. We didn't even try. We're like, I understand that's probably a thing. So we talked with Compulsion, like pretty sure we will not be able to change the entire game to account for this. So we didn't even actually officially submit because we knew the whole theme would just be not compatible with the culture there. So that happens. But we know that going in. We as publishers, we understand every game that we would wish to work with. There are going to be things that different territories have different feelings about, and you need to decide as a publisher, like you tell the developer, here's the thing, we're comfortable with the developer deciding whatever they do. The developer, at the end of the day, we need to respect what they would wish to do. So we do not show up saying, hey, I'll publish a game, but only if you change this. We need to first, as a publisher, say, I want to publish the game as he makes it or she makes it. And then tell the developer, but if you want to work well in France, here's what would work well in that territory. But we leave that to the developer. So that's what we need to decide first as a publisher. Take the game as it is. If we're not on board for that, we're just creating a bad relationship from the start.
And were there any situations like that you approached a developer and told them that probably you should change this thing or that thing to enter the market or to perform better in this market, and they ultimately disagreed and didn't do that?
Yeah.
So you said like, so a lot of times, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, we've had that happen, certainly. But like you try to very rarely do that, because if you do that enough, then it's you lose the heart of a game, right? Like you start trying to design by committee, right? Or design by government sensitivities, like that sounds like a disaster, because every culture and territory around the world has different things they're sensitive to. And you would have the most homogenized, boring game possible if you actually tried to speak to every culture and be sensitive to every culture. That sounds like a trap that we've tried to avoid. So we really, really keep it to edge cases where it's rare, and we leave it to the developer, and we understand and accept that if the developer says they don't want to, then we do not push it. We just outline the option for them.
All right. So I would like to ask one last question about publishing and,
sure,
well, broadly marketing.
Yeah.
The game. So you have been working in marketing for Gearbox for over 10 years, I think. And sure, could you just briefly name probably 3 things that changed 10 years ago and now, how they look when you market your game?
Well, a lot of people interchange marketing and PR from the outside. It's very different. It's kind of the way you split it is earned versus paid for. So PR is you've given no money to anyone, but you get on the cover of Game Informer, right, as a magazine. And that is because of a relationship where the editor at the magazine, they know that you make a great game, or they hear that you make a great game, and they want to tell the world about it. There's no money changing hands. So that's PR. That world has not changed a lot. It's just where PR spends their energy. Used to be PR would spend their energy more on magazines. Now they spend their energy more on online website stuff, and then more recently, it's generally referred to as influencers, right? Folks who will stream your game. So that's what has broadly happened there, is that where customers are is less at newsstands and more at streaming websites and static websites. So that's what has happened. What has also happened is, I think, beneficial to customers is when what could happen and does not happen nearly as much now is what look like what we would call advertorials, where years ago you would see some websites kind of cross the streams where say, hey, I heard that this publisher is going to spend $2 million buying ads on our website, but only if we do this preview where we give it lots of attention and say how great it's going to be. That was a thing that happened more than I wish. Right? As a person who used to work on the website side of things, like, did see those pitches. That did happen. But fortunately, what the world we're in now is because of streaming and influencers, there's no hiding what the game is. Like a couple of what we call bull shots, right? Which is, screenshots that were more flattering to the game than really the game would traditionally look like. Those barely happen now because there's going to be a live stream of that game. You're going to see exactly what that game is. So that's what's happening there, which is best for customers because you get a true view into what the game really is, right? So the streaming side and the PR side has greatly benefited customers. That part's great. What's also great has happened for customers as retail matters less on the marketing side. Retail is still, as much as folks who would like to call themselves progressive, who believe in the future of the industry would say, retail is still a huge component of games. Retail, for the very first time you launch a game, at least on the console side, is probably close to half of all of your game sales in that opening quarter. When you see a thing like a game company announces, oh man, 70% of our sales were digital. That's true, but only when you count PC. Because PC is nearly 100% digital. On the console side, on your Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch side, it's closer to 50-50 at launch. Even right now, games that launched this holiday. So what that pressure creates, though, on the marketing side is that people will try to create pre-orders. And when they do that, they have to manufacture things. And when they have to manufacture things, that creates even more risk. And when that risk is created, what happens is you will see people maybe promise more for a game than it really is. Right? That's the risk that it creates, is that people are tempted now because, oh my gosh, I have these 10 million boxes in a warehouse and I need people to really buy them before they figure out what the game is. So that world is getting less and less. You're seeing much more transparent communication because that risk is no longer there nearly to the degree it used to be. So that's also benefiting customers. Like, oh man, you truly get to see it because of stream. You truly get to see it because there's less warehouse risk in general in our industry. It's actually been beneficial to the customers. And I'd say the great one for customers has been the introduction of Epic Game Store. Now, their practices people had complaints with, for sure. Plenty of people had problems with the idea of exclusive games. But what also happened, a lot of people overlooked, was right as Epic Game Store announced, Valve announced their margins dropped from 30% to 25% and to 20%. I am sure that would not have happened if it were not for Epic showing up doing what they did. And when that happens, game makers see more money. It costs roughly the same to game consumers, but now you have game makers who are actually being more rewarded and more incentivized to make more games. Like, that was what Epic Game Store did. Is they helped break the monopoly, and they created competition in what a monopolized marketplace was. So that has been fantastic for gamers. Now, you would wish that they did not have to do the avenue of exclusive games, but how else would you convince customers to go to another marketplace if it were not for, they're not going to change, even if they had the exact same systems, right? The exact same community features, exact same everything. If it's the exact same game.
Yeah, gamers usually say that you have to have like achievements and maybe chats.
Sure. But even if, imagine they had all those things, would anyone switch?
Yeah, I guess not. It's not like, it's just what everybody says. If you have this, basket and achievements, and also cloud saves that did not exist when they launched, and all these features. But I also feel that what made them succeed is, of course, exclusive games, and probably some curation, meaning that they did not accept every game at first, at least, and they just chose only high-quality games to accept to their marketplace.
Yeah, and that was the thing. It was the combination. It was like, I think all of us wish that exclusives were not necessary to convince customers to try. I think also all of us wish that the feature set was exactly the same and or better. I'm sure everyone feels that way. But the big thing that they contributed, which was they managed to get Valve to move. That to me was, that was a big deal for a lot of what customers will benefit from for years to come. So that part I think is a great move for all of us as both game publishers and game players, is to have options in the marketplace. That's why you want both Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo to all also succeed, right? You want competition in that market because that's what compels people to do better things.
Yeah, and they also doing the same thing. Well, at least they started doing the same thing on mobile.
Yeah, you saw that Apple announced that, they weirdly, suddenly they have this program where you only have to pay 15%.
Yeah,
right?
I feel like it's a very clever move for Apple, because they suddenly turned the situation that now it looks like only big corporations try to defend their rights, not like the rights of all game makers.
Yeah, I agree. It was clever of Apple, but also great. I don't care what the reasons are, right? It happened, and it happened because of competition in the market.
Yeah,
right?
I agree. If it's good,
Game makers and
right.
customers benefit from that. So,
all right. So I would like to talk about still earlier days, since you mentioned when you ran the website and when you worked as a journalist and later as the owner of the news website. So let's talk about Shack News, how it was created, how it started, and how what it became at the end.
Okay. Well, I was always the owner because I was the founder.
Yeah, I mean, you just probably, hopefully, stopped doing like the heavy lifting of writing everything.
Yes. Yeah. Over years, I spent more time on all the other pieces. I started that when I moved from college in Texas to college in Florida. What happened in Texas was I got introduced to video games to a debilitating level, right? Like I started playing Doom 2, and man, I loved that. I then moved to go to college in Florida, just maybe 6 months after I started really playing games a lot. And when I moved there, I now knew no one, but I knew I loved video games. So I decided to create a website talking about next video games, which was Quake at that time. I did that, and I created a website to talk about the upcoming Quake launch, and then also sharing news and information about other related games, which was a lot of Doom, right? Which was a small thing at the time. So that's what I started doing. I think that what that revealed is that a thing that my parents, I guess, really helped me put my finger on, is that my passion is not just playing games, which I do a lot of that, sure, but it is connecting people to games. Is what I've realized and that's a weird passion, right? Like you look at a lot of folks, they love making games. That's easy to understand. You love to make entertainment, or you love to entertain people, right? You like to be on stage and demonstrating, like, look at this great thing I'm doing. And I realized that I'm not either of those things. I like making sure people are aware of entertainment. Oh, that's just weird. but that's what I was doing during that time, was exactly that. I was just pointing out to people, hey, you should see this. This is really cool. Did that more and more. Then I started covering more games. Then I expanded to getting people to play games, which I created the file site. So people were downloading and playing games as well. Did that. And it was really just about connecting people to seeing and talking about games. And so I did that for a dozen years. That grew and grew. And I was very fortunate to make a few partnerships along the way to help host the expensive to host website. I got connected to a couple of ISPs for helping us manage all the file downloads. That got really expensive. So we started taking a subscription of like, hey, if you want to download even faster, back when that was more of a thing, right? So created a subscription service there. And that went really, really well. Then I got really tired of working from home. Funny to say that now, but I got really tired of that. And so told my wife, I was like, I just can't, I cannot do this. I'm working insane hours and I'm just stuck in this chair all day and I'm not even getting to see the world, right? So I decided I want to sell. Jill was like, I don't know what my next job is, but it's not this. So did that. I live in the same town as several friends who work at Gearbox. I declared, hey guys, I'm going to sell. I don't know what I'm doing next. Sell it. And Randy Pitchford was there and nice enough to say, and he said exactly that. He's like, hey, I don't know what you're doing next, but I bet you it'll be fun. And I bet I would love it if you did it as part of Gearbox. And so he stuck his neck out with his coworkers and said, hey, I want to hire this guy. I'm not sure what he's going to do. Right? He's like, and so he convinced his coworkers and co-founders to hire me when it was not clear what my next job would be outside of, I guess, PR, right? Was really the pitch. And it's worked. And I've been very, very lucky for him to have given me the opportunity.
Do you feel like this is a usual thing that game journalists do, converting from writing about games on, well, the news or reviews websites to working as a PR guy or marketing guy?
That's the most common. Yeah, it's what I can tell you actually. When you look at the folks who I employed at Shack News, they are now about 60% from back then now working at game companies. They're working, I can rattle off, they're working at ZeniMax, Activision, Ubisoft, Gearbox, a couple of indies, the Firewatch, I can't remember the name of the studio did that. But yeah, yes, it's very common. At least back then, because back when I was doing it, it was a much smaller industry. And also it was just, if you're passionate about games, you're just looking for a foot in the door and that was it. Now, it's much more specialized, where both journalism and game making have elevated, right? Like, it's to be a game writer is not traditional writing. To be a game writer, you need to have a technical understanding, or to be an effective one, about what you write, what that costs to put it on a screen, right? And that's true for movie writers, TV show writers. That's also true for game writers, right? Like you need to have that understanding of how does that translate to dollars it costs to put that on a screen. So that's a thing that gets to be more and more. But yeah, it is definitely common. It is very common for back when I created that website back in the day. The majority ended up working in the games industry.
We already talked about today how marketing changed for games. Well, do you think in these times, I mean, like 10 years or so, game journalism changed too? And if yes, then how so?
Yeah, I think it changed for the better. So most actually very early on, it was, I would say, more just let's just say the entertainment weeklies of the world, where everyone's just a fan. There's no or very little critical journalism. It was all really just centered around, here's this great new thing, we think you'll love it, and it's everything, you're going to love it. It's video games. Can't believe we have these. And that's what that world was, 20 years ago, where all it was what we call fluff pieces. That was fun and exciting, but also young and immature, right? Because not every game is great. So what has happened over time is a few things. One is everyone got more experience, and they understood not every time is a great experience, right? Some games are not good, or some games are shipped before they should have been shipped, right? So that has changed, and now journalists have gotten a little bit more skeptical. And that's why you would actually call them journalists. I wouldn't call it journalism back when I did it, really. I would call that at best communicating about games, right? So what has happened is more experience has happened and more skepticism has happened, and that's been good for game players to understand. Like when a journalist tells me about a game, if they say it looks good, there's a better likelihood that they actually mean it than it used to be. What has happened in the next round of it, though, was that journalists our game website owners got to understand more and more that salacious headlines make more money, right? And that's actually true for all news media in our world now, right? People have realized now, like, wow, if I make a controversial headline, I'm more likely to get more traffic and make more money. And that part that's been a bummer. And that's true for media at large, right? Is that, and video games is no different, where they will create a controversy over something that is not a controversy. That part has been a bummer. And to make that worse, now traditional game makers or traditional games media are starting to lose an audience to streamers. So now they're watching their traffic go down. At the same time, they're observing controversial headlines make me money. So what do you think they do? Is they're more likely to get more controversial, hoping to at least hang on to a bit more audience. And that's actually damaging to our industry, right? To make controversies out of absolutely everything when there's not one there, it's not helpful. So that part's been a bummer. That's not true for all, but that is starting to happen more. And on the streamer side, those guys are just saying, here's a game, check it out, I'm playing it. However, they are sometimes paid to say how great it is. And customers have not yet fully gotten to the point where they're really tracking the idea that the streamer playing this game, acting like they're having fun, sometimes they're not, and they're just acting.
So it is basically back to the times of the magazines, when you were essentially paid to write something flattering about the game, right?
Exactly that. So customers have not yet figured out the number of times that a streamer will do a thing saying they're having fun for maybe not fully honest reasons. And the rules are not really clear there. You will see some streamers say advertisement, others don't, right? Some will be more honest than others about if they're actually having fun or not. But yeah, it's that world again where the media is transacting with game makers and game publishers. And I would think you're not ever going to have a fully objective media. Every games writer still has rent to pay, right? So it's not all doom and gloom. There's plenty of folks who are doing just fine. And the more successful they are, the more likely they are actually to be more honest. Because they're like, I'll make my rent even if I tell you this game's terrible, right? Like, but
yeah. I also feel like it's connected to the age of the industry itself. Like, I feel it's the path of the majority of games media outlets that you start small with the fan base built around probably a franchise or maybe a platform, and then grow to become, well, essentially more or less journalism. And in like movies or music industries, it's totally different, because these industries, they are much more mature, and people kind of understand how journalism works and how these industries also work, right?
Yeah.
So, and inherently, journalism and media outlets are different in these industries. And I feel like it's all part of the maturing of our industry.
Yeah, I agree. We're just watching it go through those growing pains, right? Of, just the society at large understanding that it's just like those entertainment industries, and the actual people working in it understanding how to communicate about what they're making, communicate about what they're publishing, communicating about what they as a journalist are seeing and reporting back, right? Like but the thing is, at the same time, we've also gone through the technology transition of print to website to stream, right? So like that compounds the confusion. So we got a long way to go, but I mean, fortunately, this is all entertainment, right? Like we're lucky to work in that industry where our entire job revolves around how many people can we make smile. Like that's a great feeling to have, be able to, that's your job at the end of the day.
All right, so let's talk about games industry in general, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, well, first, that's been a hell of a year, and hopefully the next one will be better, and it's just around the corner. Well, do you think this year was, so to speak, net positive or net negative for games industry?
Man, that's hard to separate the two. I would say as much as you can not to, considering just the folks who are fortunate enough to have lived through this, which is not true for everyone. What this has done has forced game makers and publishers to depend more than ever on remote communication, which will improve how well they communicate across their emails and their documents, and the discipline they've shown on their meeting times and that kind of stuff. In that world, it has forced a greater discipline that will translate back to even when folks are back into an office. So that has trained discipline into an industry that certainly could use it, right? A lot of us get into video games because we like goofing off, right? So that part has been a benefit to how we communicate and work on games and getting them out to the world. It has also created a lot of people stuck at home where they're going to play more games, right? They're going to entertain themselves somehow. So that also has had a net, exposure to game to people who maybe were not gamers before are now for sure. So that also has happened. But man, if it's not just filled with like pain and guilt, right? Like just thinking about, and I'm sure you probably do as well, have family members and friends who are, not alive anymore. And that's just, an awful feeling. So like it's wanting to do better to entertain people is a driving thing for us, but man, that will always hang over our head of knowing that, maybe we learned a few things, but the price was too high. That it's not been worth it, not by any means. So we've learned things, but the price was too high.
Do you feel like it changed anything regarding your work at Gearbox Publishing? Did it shake up the schedule of releases and probably things went differently? Yeah.
Godfall was way harder to launch, right? And that's been very tough. You saw a lot more games delayed at launch than you would have traditionally seen. So that's true for, I think, our whole industry is. And I think the pains will be felt for years to come. When I think about what's happened is usually games are created collaboratively with folks talking creatively about it, and that is best communicated in person with hand gestures, face expression, those kinds of things. And when those meetings happen, those games don't come out for a few years. So I think we've had roughly a year of less collaborative time when it comes to the creative process. So which makes me think that there was probably going to be a time, much like when we had the Writers Guild strike years ago in Hollywood. I think we're going to see a window in a couple of years where there's actually less, because those creative moments were stifled by not being able to work in person together. There's production challenges, yes, once we've decided on a thing, but I think the true thing is we're going to see a window in time a couple of years from now where there's less new creative things happening because those creative meetings were stifled.
But speaking about the creative side, do you feel like there will be a new wave of games that are going to be inspired by these times, by the pandemic, the feeling of being stuck at home?
Yeah.
And
oh, yeah.
Because I feel like this industry is much more flexible than, say, movies, and it's going to reflect the real world much sooner. That is going to happen in the movies or probably even in the music and other industries.
Oh yeah, I absolutely expect that. Much like as game publishers, I was talking about how we publish what we know. Game makers and game writers, they're going to make and write what they know. So yes, I do imagine a couple of years from now, we will see some games inspired by this time in society. Yep.
All right. So as we're inching to the end of our interview, I would like to ask you to advise something for our listeners to buy as a gift, hopefully games or game platforms, because Christmas is soon, and well, we'll have to support our favorite game makers.
Yeah. What games should they get?
Yeah, games or anything game related.
Oh my goodness. Well, for for families, honestly, the Nintendo is so far ahead of the game, right? I would still heartily recommend that get a Nintendo Switch and a couple of Joy-Cons and play with friends and family. There are so many games on that platform that are great, including, of course, Borderlands, right? But maybe don't play that with your 6-year-old. That one I think is a lot of fun. If you are fortunate enough to have gotten a PlayStation 5, Godfall is a heck of a lot of fun, and we're adding more and more content to that every day. So that was, I'd say, I can honestly recommend heartily. I've played plenty of that, a lot more than a lot of games I've played lately. When I think about on the just straight up PC side, Godfall is available there, but also look, the cheap thrill ride that is Among Us, it's worth it for $5 or $4, I think they're selling it for right now. That's a lot of fun, and it's just a few bucks. I would recommend it. It's worth, probably won't keep your attention long term, but it's worth a few bucks, and it's worth the price that you pay for that entertainment. And then, yeah, I think that really covers it. Those are the things I'd recommend. Play with your friends and family if you can. Play a little hardcore PC action stuff if you can. And then random casual pickups also. Pick up those indie games. There's plenty of those always on sale.
Yeah, and don't forget to buy Godfall.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, Steve, thank you for coming. Thank you for this talk. That was very entertaining, interesting, and I hope educational.
Yeah, it was my pleasure, sir.
Yeah, thank you, and goodbye to all.
Thank you.